Can a sex crime be charged as a misdemeanor? Hi, I'm Jeff Hampton with the Fulgham Law Firm. Welcome to our YouTube channel today. Today we're going to talk a little bit about understanding how certain crimes with sexual connotations associated with them, how are they decided as being charged as a misdemeanor or felony, and what can you do about it? By the way, if you wait around till the end of this video, I'll also give you a free ebook, What to Do If You've Been Charged with a Crime in Texas. Now, let's talk about this. Generally, sex crimes are prosecuted as felonies. I mean, most of everything you're going to find in Texas, under Texas law, you're going to see that there's going to be felony charges involved, carrying mandatory jail time, and many times there's mandatory sex offender registration requirements. However, certain types of sex crimes that are labeled as sexual-based offenses under Texas law, if they do not involve penetrative sexual contact, then that individual could be charged potentially on a misdemeanor charged instead of a felony. So, and what does that mean? Well, obviously, even if you're charged with a felony sex crime, if that felony sex crime could be lowered to a lesser charge, to a misdemeanor-based sex crime, you could be saving yourself from jail time. You could be saving yourself from having to register as a possible sex offender, particularly if you didn't do it. I mean, that's a pretty important thing. I think the worst thing, a lot of people look at it and say, well, you know, this is horrible. Everybody that's ever charged with this should be required to register as a sex offender. Yeah, but what if you're innocent? What if you didn't do what they claimed that you did? And what if the state has overcharged you with a crime you did not commit? That's why it's important to know and understand the distinction here. So we're going to go over three main issues that you need to, and actually there's more than three. We're going to cover I'm going to just hit some of these as we go along. But I'm going to cover some main points and questions that you need to ask whenever it comes up, whether or not the case can be charged as a misdemeanor or felony when you're looking at a sex crime. Number one, what was the sexual act in question? Acts involving penetrative sexual contact or violence are always going to be charged as a felony-level sex crime. However, there are lesser forms of sexual contact, such as sexual touching, that may be charged as a misdemeanor level, and I'm going to break these down more specifically here in just a minute. The second question you have to ask is, what is the individual's age? If the person being the alleged victim was a minor at the time of the offense, this is one of those things that you have to look at. A minor involved is almost always going to be a felony charge, and that's critical. Who is the alleged victim? Is it an adult or is it a minor? If it's a minor, you're looking at a felony. If it is an adult, depending upon the type of sexual touching that's involved, it could be a lesser charge under a misdemeanor. And so then you have to ask the age of the person being charged. Was the individual tried as an adult? Are they an adult or are they a child? Once again, that will play a big role. Juvenile code is set up very different. The whole standard under the juvenile code is actually under the family law. It's a family law set up, and it's under the family code that asks what is in the best interest of that child. If it's an adult, it's totally different. If you're talking about an adult defendant and a minor victim, you're talking about a felony charge, all right? Now, let's talk about the victim's relationship with the defendant. In some cases, the victim's relationship with the defendant may be relevant. If the defendant has a position of authority or trust with the victim, that this is an aggravating factor. Best example of this is what happens when an adult teacher has sex with an adult student. And you see this with an 18-year-old senior, right? This happens all the time. We hear, it seems like it's in the news all the time, where a 30-year-old female teacher and an 18-year-old male student. Well, you say, yeah, but they're consenting adults. The problem is it now becomes a felony whenever that someone has authority over another, having official authority. Then finally, we're asking, were there any prior sex crimes? If the person being charged has a criminal history, particularly of sex crimes, this is considered an aggravating factor, and it's likely to increase the severity of the charges. So the reality of it, though, is many times sex crime prosecutions are very subjective, and the severity of charges and sentencing is often left at the discretion of the prosecution. And so there's a lot of room for your attorney, your experienced and aggressive criminal attorney, to be able to go in there and try to use some leverage to try to help get you the best result possible. Now let's talk about some specific crimes. Now we're talking about sex crimes that exist that are misdemeanors, okay, that can be considered under that lesser range of punishment. The first one we're going to look at is the crime of public lewdness. Now, in public lewdness, the individual being charged supposedly engages in one of the following sexual acts in a public place or is reckless about whether another person is present who would then be offended or alarmed. So, in other words, it's either in a public place, and I'm just going to tell you, public sex, right? I mean, that's stuff that happens sometimes. People talk about that, and people get caught doing that. Well, that's the crime of public lewdness, okay? So if there's an act of sexual intercourse or an act of deviant sexual intercourse, as it's defined under the penal code, or sexual contact that's taking place, if it meets that, if it's in a public place or the individual is reckless about someone else seeing it, knowing that they should have not been reckless in that conduct, you could be looking at a public lewdness charge. Public lewdness is a Class A misdemeanor, punishable by up to 1 year in the county jail and up to a $4,000 fine. Now, the next crime is indecent exposure. If you are charged with the crime of indecent exposure, the state of Texas will be alleging that by exposing the anus or any part of the genitals, that it was done, here's the key part though, with the intent to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of any person, in other words, anyone that would see it, and is reckless about whether another person is present who will be offended or alarmed by the act. Now, this is a charge under indecent exposure. It's actually a Class B misdemeanor, which means it's punishable by up to 180 days in jail and up to a $2,000 fine. Now, some people say, well, it's not that big of a deal then. It's just a lesser charge. Be careful. The state of Texas monitors all this. First of all, if you take a conviction of this, you're in a database. The next time you get one, you could be having to register. Subsequent indecent exposure charges can require you to register as a sex offender, just like someone who molested a child under that statute, okay? It's a big deal, all right? So these sex crimes are treated in a very specific way by the state, and they monitor people's prior convictions. Okay, the next one we talk about is voyeurism. So in here, this is a very simple. If anyone is observing someone in a dwelling or other location in which that victim has a reasonable expectation of privacy. Now, many times voyeurism can be charged as a Class C misdemeanor unless the individual being charged has 2 or more prior voyeurism convictions, or if the victim being observed is a minor. Okay, if you're talking about a child that's being viewed, in that situation, you elevate the charges pretty significantly, all right? Now, what about offensive sexual contact? Now, I'm going to tell you the law's changed on this. Back in the past, if someone, let's say someone contacts another person and let's say they accidentally touch their backside or some part of their body, and that whether or not it was intentional or not, that person's offended. Well, many times, if offensive contact that appears to be sexual in nature, that situation has in the past many times been charged as a Class C misdemeanor as assault by contact, offensive contact. And that is only punishable by up to a $500 fine and no jail time, okay? Now, the problem with that is over time, people got upset about that, and the Texas legislature took that issue on, and they've now created a new law called indecent assault. And this is under the Texas Penal Code section 22.012. Indecent assault, it takes place when a person commits this offense without the other person's consent and with the intent to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of any person. Here's the key. The person touches the anus, breast, or any part of the genitals of another person. Number 2, touches another person with the anus, breast, or any part of the genitals of any person. Number 3, exposes or attempts to expose another person's genitals. Well, you know, right? I mean, that's all I got to say. I don't have to get into all the other specifics that are in there. basically exposing another person's genitals, or causes another person to contact the blood, seminal fluid, or any other type of fluid of a person. Well, we're getting pretty descriptive here, but that's what the law says. And then number 4, if that happens, here's the key. Under this section, this is basically called the groping statute. That's kind of what people call it, which means someone comes up and touches or exposes themselves, and you say, well, they weren't hurt, right? No one was actually hurt. They were just kind of offended by it, and it's either touching or it's the exposing, and that's what the law says. Well, under this section now, it elevates that crime now to a Class A misdemeanor, which means it can be punishable by up to a 1-year county jail sentence and up to a $4,000 fine. So it's very important that we understand there's a new change in the law as to what Texas law now provides. Finally, I'm going to go through the rest of these very quickly. Everyone knows the crime of prostitution. Prostitution, offering to engage in any type of sexual conduct in exchange for some type of fee or anything of value, results in a Class B misdemeanor, punishable by up to 180 days in jail and up to a $2,000 fine, as well as solicitation of prostitution. The defendant, if someone solicits, offers themselves for a prostitution by asking another person to engage in sexual conduct with them in exchange for that fee, that's equally a crime charged as a Class B misdemeanor, up to 180 days in jail and up to a $2,000 fine. The final one is, this is what happens, is called harassment. Not really a sex crime, but it happens all the time in the context of sexual type issues that arise. Because here it's unwanted contact, and sometimes it can be sexual in nature. You can be charged with a Class B misdemeanor in this situation if you trying to reach out to that person, if you did it with the intent to annoy or to alarm them, or if there was an individual threat or specific threat that was made. We have other videos that cover this. I encourage you to go back and take a look at our harassment video. I'll go into more detail on that. But this is a little bit of an overview for you. I want you to understand, maybe you're facing a felony sex crime. Sometimes that crime can be lowered to one of these lesser charges. Or maybe you're facing exactly one of these crimes I spoke about here today. If so, you need the help of an experienced criminal defense attorney to walk you through this process. If your case is out of the North Texas area, feel free to contact the Fulgham Law Firm for a free case consultation at 817-877-3030. Thanks again for joining us here today. I promised you I'd give you a free ebook. Click the link down below. I'll shoot you over that free ebook. And if you like what you heard here today, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be happy to send you more content just like this. Thanks again for joining us.